Good afternoon. Pleased to be here to discuss with so many people who have an interest in this file. My name is Philip Tod. I'm the Deputy Head of Unit for the Securities Markets Unit, working on this file amongst others. This afternoon, I would like to first of all explain a little bit, although Case Swinburne has given you a good overview of why this proposal has been brought forward, just to recap briefly on that point. Run through the main elements of the proposal, address the question of how this proposal will enhance the integrity of benchmarks in our view, why we think it will protect retail investors better, a few words about the benefits, and then conclude with a few words about the next steps. So just to echo the remarks which Case Swinburne made about why this proposal has been brought forward. She mentioned all the scandals, not just on concerning LIBOR and RIBOR, but investigations into manipulation of commodity benchmarks, the ongoing investigations into the manipulation of foreign exchange benchmarks, which we've been reading so much about in the press in the last few days and weeks. All of these concerns are magnified because benchmarks are at the heart of our financial system. Trillions of euros of derivatives reference those benchmarks, but not only financial instruments reference those benchmarks, we also have financial contracts, mortgages, people's mortgages depend on these benchmarks, and we have also benchmarks are used to measure the performance of investment funds. So they have a huge knock-on effect, and they have a huge impact not just on markets but also on retail investors. And so these scandals have undermined confidence in the market and undermined the confidence of retail investors and mortgage holders. We get many complaints from mortgage holders protesting about the reports that they read in the press of the manipulation of benchmarks and expressing concern that their mortgages may have been affected as a result. So really this is a grassroots concern that we are feeling every day in our correspondence from citizens. Also, benchmarks, of course, have implications for monetary policy and for financial stability more broadly. So, this is the background to the Commission's proposal. We first responded by issuing amendments to our market abuse proposals to make sure that manipulation of the benchmark was unequivocally prohibited. But this proposal is about complementing those proposals and ensuring that benchmarks are not subject to manipulation, that they are robust, reliable, and representative, and that they are fit for purpose. Just a few words about the main elements of the proposal. It's broad in scope, as with the IOSCO principles. Our approach has been that benchmarks which are subject to similar vulnerabilities, in particular to conflicts of interest and to the use of discretion, could be at risk of manipulation and therefore should be within the scope of the proposal. But it also includes a number of elements to ensure that they are proportionate to those requirements, notably specific requirements for interest rate benchmarks, for commodity benchmarks, benchmarks using regulated data, and for critical benchmarks. The proposal ensures that benchmark administrators have to be authorized. They will be subject to ongoing supervision for the first time, which closes an important loophole. And we also have provision for critical benchmarks. So most benchmarks will be subject to national supervision, but critical benchmarks will be subject to European supervision through colleges of supervisors, with a strong role for ESMA in that supervision. The proposal imposes certain requirements in terms of governance, notably to address conflicts of interest, which have to be identified and managed. It imposes methodology requirements, so the methodology has to be outlined in a benchmark statement. There are requirements on the input data based on the IOSCO principles, so not just requiring giving preference to transaction data, but also allowing non-transaction data to be used so long as that is verifiable. There are contributor requirements. Contributors have to sign a legally binding code of conduct with the benchmark administrator. and supervised entities who are contributors will be subject to supervision for their compliance with those principles. The proposal aims to increase transparency in terms of the benchmark statement, in terms of the input data to benchmarks, and it aims to improve investor protection. In particular, there is a provision whereby benchmarks which are used in financial contracts, namely mortgages, the credit institution will have to assess the suitability of that benchmark for that purpose. There is a third country regime to take account of the fact that, as Case Swinburne mentioned, benchmarks are a global business, and we need to make sure that benchmarks from third countries which are used in the EU comply with the same standards that we comply with, which are the IOSCO principles. So we propose a streamlined third country regime which very much takes into account the IOSCO principles. And lastly, as I mentioned before, we do have specific provisions for critical benchmarks, ensuring that benchmarks such as Euribor and LIBOR have that European dimension taken into account through colleges of supervisors and the possibility of binding mediation by ESMA. So why do we think this proposal will enhance integrity? Well, first and foremost, because it introduces authorization requirements for benchmark administrators for the first time. They will be subject to ongoing supervision, and they can be investigated by the competent authorities for their compliance with the requirements, and they can face administrative sanctions if they do not comply. It enhances governance by tackling conflicts of interest, by enhancing oversight of benchmarks, and increasing their accountability through the benchmark statement, through the requirement for complaints procedure. Benchmarks will have to have a robust methodology, which will have to be disclosed at the outset. They will have to be based on sufficient data, as I mentioned before. That input data will have to be transparent, although there is provision for the transparency to be delayed under certain conditions. And there are also requirements for breaches of the regulation to be reported to the authorities to help them to investigate possible breaches. The proposal will also help to better protect investors by, first of all, ensuring that benchmarks that are on which for example, the value of their financial instruments or the value of the price of their mortgage will be paid, those benchmarks are robust. They will benefit through greater transparency, such as through the benchmark statement, which will have to set out clearly what a benchmark measures, what its vulnerabilities are, to enable investors to choose, where appropriate, the right benchmark for them. The publication of underlying data will allow them to verify that the benchmark is doing what it sets out to do in a robust and reliable way. And as I said, the suitability assessment will help mortgage holders to be reassured that their mortgage is based on the suitable benchmark. So overall, we think that this proposal will bring benefits, and the benefits will outweigh the costs in ensuring robust, accurate, and reliable benchmarks. It will help to restore confidence, which has been so badly affected by the series of scandals. Transparency will help to ensure that investors can make informed choices, and the single market will be enhanced because we will avoid the fragmentation of rules which could occur if we did not act now to ensure a coordinated common European approach to this issue. We're obliged to act. IOSCO has adopted international principles, and this is the EU's response to those principles. In terms of the next steps, clearly the proposal is now before the European Parliament. Mrs. Bowles has prepared a first draft of her report, and we expect that from her timetable that will be voted in January. We heard what Kate Swinburne said, but we prefer to remain optimistic that this issue has, after all, been discussed already in IOSCO. All member states have signed up to the IOSCO principles, so we think it should be possible for this issue to be dealt with swiftly by the Council also, and that therefore we should be able to resolve this issue before the European elections next year. So the proposal can enter into force in 2014.